Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be watching this. Maybe you are a little midnight gremlin, such as myself, who enjoys watching video essays much too late at night. Today we're going to talk about Renaissance Italy. It's a very broad subject, there's a lot to tackle here, but I hope to defend the study of Renaissance Italy today and kind of by proxy defend the study of history in general and defend the study of humanism and of the arts and the study of humanity and who we are, because in our very modern productivity focused world and our post-capitalist world, we can often lose out on those studies in favor of more STEM-based programs. We often lose our humanity to those subjects. There's nothing wrong with the pursuit of those subjects, but not when it comes at the cost of our humanity. Oh my gosh, big statement. I know. But hopefully by the end of this video, I can kind of bring to light this perspective of wanting to preserve the study of history and humanity and learning from our past mistakes and bringing that forward into the future. So let's get started. In order to break this down to help us understand it, I wanted to first start off with the study of history, or the study of Renaissance Italy, the historical, political aspects of it, because there's a lot going on in Renaissance Italy, so I feel like breaking it down into smaller chunks is going to make this a little bit easier. So if we think about Renaissance Italy in a purely historical events and facts, what a time for politics in general. Absolutely, the first thing that should come to mind when I say politics in Renaissance Italy should be the Medici family. I would say probably one of the most notorious families in history. Like, even if you don't know a lot about Renaissance Italy, I feel like you had to have heard the name somewhere in some way. But when you say Medici, you have to think political turmoil. This family ruled Florence, and some people were absolutely in support of them and loved them because they were employed by them and they improved their livelihood. And other people really hated them, such as the Pazzi family, who were very much in competition of them. Throughout early Renaissance history, we have the Pazzi conspiracy and the murder of Lorenzo de' Medici's brother. So if you think that public assassinations are a new thing, no, you're wrong. They've been around forever. And the reasoning behind the Pazzi family wanting to murder the Medicis and throw them out of power is very similar to reasons in our own politics. The Medicis were a small group, a small body of government with almost complete control over an extremely large population. Oh, and there was like no democracy. Like there was a huge struggle and fight for democracy. There was the large peasant class, so we had the upper class, the slightly more wealthy, and then we had the Medicis on top. Who do you think got the stronger vote? Big question. The Medicis also worked their way into the clergy, into papal employment. They worked their way into all aspects of Florentine life. Wherever you went, there was a Medici in charge. Does that remind you of absolutely anything in modern politics? I'm not going to name names. I don't want to get sued. I don't want to get hunted by the government. I'm just going to say that you can make your own personal connections with that there. As serious as all those problems are, it's also so vastly entertaining. The Medicis have made some of the greatest entertainment and some of the greatest television as well. There's so many shows about the Medici, or about, kind of inspired by the Medici, of these blood feuds between families. Renaissance Italy was family versus family 1000%. Like, there was drama, there was marriages, there was this, there was so much drama. If you think, oh my, why are Italian people like that? You can trace it back real far. They have always, the Italian people, beefing with each other all of the time. You cannot stop them. If they have a point to make, they're going to make it, and they're going to kill somebody to get the point across, and they're just gonna keep going back and forth, keep going back and forth. You wanna know? You wanna know something? Where do you think Shakespeare got it? There's a reason that this is set in Italy, okay? Specifically northern Italy, with rich families being at war, okay? Down south, we were just a little bit more crazy. He had to set it in a slightly nicer setting. Where do you think Shakespeare got it? Okay? Again, another wonderful thing to come out of the Renaissance. I just want you to take that in and think about it. With the study of history more broadly, you just become really annoying. You just I know too many things. I am a double minor student in both history and global humanities, so I am unfortunately the most passionate in talking about these things because I think that the combined efforts of these two subjects can absolutely give you the weapons and tools that you need in order to survive everyday life and understand modern politics and understand the world as it be, where these powers came from. However, it can also make you unable to watch any kind of historical fiction movie. I recently went on a absolutely lovely date with my dear boyfriend to the Indiana Jones Orchestra with the Vancouver Symphony. All I could think the entire time was A, Harrison Ford, what a man. Secondly, when someone tell me when Hitler had the time or the money to search for the Ark of the Covenant. When Germany was broke, they actually did get it right with Hitler being Führer, and it was Hitler being Führer, and then before World War II actually broke out, they did actually correctly choose the date and time for the movie. However, when did Hitler have the time? He didn't. And that's all I could think about the whole time. The other thing I could also think about the whole time was the fact that at the beginning of the movie, they called young Professor Harrison Ford, young Professor Indiana Jones, into a meeting, said the Nazis are looking for something. He knew exactly what it was out of the multitude of biblical artifacts. Secondly, he was carrying the correct tome, not book, tome from his lecture, and which happened to have pictures. Not only do you never find the correct book that you're actually looking for with proper evidence of what you're looking for, the fact that it had pictures, diagrams, and he just had it on him. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. Any historian knows. Finding information on exactly what you're looking for, it doesn't happen. Especially not ancient biblical artifacts. I'm taking a borderline archaeology class right now in the early veneration of the Virgin Mary. There's nothing in those sources. We're sifting through. We're panhandling with a chain link fence. That's what the study of history feels like. It feels like digging through a river looking for gold with a chain link fence, with the Home Depot orange plastic fence. That's what you're panhandling with, okay? That's the study of history. It is diabolical. I'm sorry I got angry. I'm just very passionate. The study of history will drive you crazy. It is absolutely one of the most fulfilling, fantastic things I've ever done in my life was pursue history. I have gone through history from antiquity to the modern day, and every time I go back through it, there's something new to find, and there is a new piece of information, a new tool for me to use to look at the modern world in these new fascinating ways. I think most recently, with regards to having tools in order to tackle the future, was the COVID pandemic. So, bringing it back to Renaissance Italy, the Renaissance kind of came during the Black Death. So, a lot of the Renaissance, a lot of the writing within the Renaissance, a lot of the historical sources during the Renaissance are very much influenced and informed by this absolutely horrific pandemic. There are writings from Boccaccio's Decameron that explain how life was turned upside down for them. And as a modern person, a modern young person who would have been the same age as one of these people during the Black Death, at that point, I might have been a mother with kids and living through a pandemic of my own. I might have had to bury children. I might have had to leave children in the world of the living, hungry and destitute. But here I am in the modern day, hiding in my basement on Zoom and feeling like the world is ending. Like, there is not a person you can talk to that doesn't say, like, yes, there was great things about the pandemic, but everyone struggled through it in some way. Everyone suffered something. It can be something as petty as losing out on travel, but for me it was a complete career change. I wanted to be a musician and a performer, and I'm now going to be a social studies teacher. And it's a bit of a blessing and a curse, because throughout that halting of life, I found what I really wanted to do. And it's storytelling. So I thought, how can I make a career out of storytelling? Sure, I can do that through music. There are musicians 1,000 times more talented than me. But I found my niche in storytelling, and that led me to the study of history and humanities. So the study of history is not to be overlooked. It can be wildly entertaining. It is so informative. And when you look back at history, you realize that everything is cyclical. Nothing that you are experiencing right now, nothing that the world is experiencing right now is happening for the first time. Nothing. You should look at the burning of books, the banning of books in modern day, and there should be so many red flags going on. Because throughout history, that has been a signal, a beacon shining, okay, a SOS flare of stuff is about to go down. Stuff is about to be very wrong. Even in Renaissance Italy, they saw Savonarola wanting to, burn the vanities and ban these books and ban the indulgence of humanity. And it caught on for a couple years. And then they went, oh, we want to put everything in a fire and burn it? How about we string you up and light you on fire? Okay? Look at the French. Look what the French are doing. The French government said, hey, farmers, we're going to raise your taxes. And they said, I'm going to put manure on your government buildings. Be like the French. Be like the Italian. Stand up for what you believe in. History is what informs us. You are not alone in anything you are feeling. I promise, if you look back 50 years, 100 years, 500 years, 2,000 years, you are going to find someone in each of those time periods that is feeling almost the same thing as you in that moment, that is experiencing something so similar to you. The environment and the context might be different, but the humanity at its core is so similar. So let's move on to the study of humanities. We can't really talk about, I guess, the rise of humanism within Renaissance Italy without talking about my main man over here. He's Petrarch. So, guys, Petrarch. He's holding a book. He's got these nice, simple little robes. A scholar. Petrarca. Whoa. Crazy. He was like a humanist. Before him, technically, you would have Mr. Dante Alighieri, who wrote this wonderful the Divine Comedy. It's cool. You should read it. On the topic of the Divine Comedy, last summer I actually took a trip to Italy in which I visited Pisa, and Pisa was kind of just meant for us to be a bit of a rest day in between Milan and Rome. And I was like, well, of course, we have to go see the Leaning Tower. As stupid as I think the Leaning Tower is, we went to go see it because our hotel was literally 2 blocks away, and I was like, we can't not see it, even though we're exhausted. And I was right. The Leaning Tower is the most boring part of that entire complex. What people don't realize is right next to the Leaning Tower of Pisa, which I don't know how it's still open to the public for people to go and walk up. Don't know how that is still allowed, is a stunning cathedral and basilica. Next to that, which completely took me by surprise, was this crypt. And in the crypt was this fresco of hell, which was, at least to me, immediately recognizable as the Inferno, as the Divine Comedy. And I almost had to hold in laughter in a place that should not be taken lightly, in a place that should be taken very, very seriously. I had to bite my tongue because Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy is not recognized by the church. It is actually almost so much more than a biblical story. In a sense, it is almost biblical fan fiction written by Dante, with his idol taking him through the layers of hell and purgatory, and his lover taking him through the uh the layers of paradise. It's a completely a self-insert daydream. And I don't mean to diminish the work in any sense, but that's really what it is. It is not meant to be the word of God in any way. It is not meant to be taken seriously as what the church supports or what the church thinks that these places are like or that they even exist. So for this to end up in a holy space dedicated to the dead, alongside, like, like the Last Judgment and all these other biblical stories, for something like this to end up in such a renowned space, and Pisa is not that far from Florence. So Dante was banished from Florence for being Dante, and he wrote this novel, or he wrote these poems, and they got such notoriety that they ended up in frescoes as the true depictions of what hell is like. And it's an extremely disturbing image. And the reason I want it left up for so long is because I want this image to confront you, because I stared at this thing for probably like 10 or 15 minutes while I was there, because it really makes you think, and it's horrific, and it is very similar, I think, to the depictions of the Black Death as well, in terms of its horror. But I just thought, how beautiful of Dante's angry little poem to end up on the walls of a crypt in a holy space. Just you gotta love the guy, you know. He did great things. If anything, just for that moment of being in a space so serious and so dreary, and to stare at something so horrific and laugh, that moment to me is why I study humanity. Because what a human moment to feel so many complicated things at once, and to laugh in the face of hell and death is extremely poetic and extremely human to me, and it's why I love humanism. After that side tangent about Dante, who was kind of the predecessor to Petrarch, um, we really gotta owe a lot to this guy. I personally owe so much to Petrarch and his contemporaries, these archaeologists, these pirates of books and of knowledge and of the preservation of the stories of humanity. We owe a lot to them. We owe a lot to them because of the book that I'm holding, because of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Without Petrarch and his fellow humanists, it would be very unlikely that we would still have these stories from antiquity. It would be very unlikely that we would have the relationships with these authors if it weren't for Petrarch, because these stories of ancient Greece, we learn so much of them, and it's too much for me to even attempt to put into a video or put into words, because something about storytelling is so cyclical in nature. Just as we reach through history and we find people in similar circumstances to the ones that we are in now, when you reach back through humanity, you find that the same stories are told over and over and over again, because we take them and we look at them with modern eyes. We look at them through completely different lenses to, take from Petrarch and his theory of imitation to, to take lemons and turn them into lemonade, turn them into a lemon tart, do whatever you want with these stories, because they are yours to take and to mold. And we can see in modern day that people have absolutely done that. I have a pile of books here, a niche of mine, you might say, on ancient Greek retellings, told about incredible women in the ancient world, in ancient mythology. And they are some of the most beautiful things because we somehow can relate to them so well, even though these are stories that we are so deeply removed from. Reading this book, reading Circe, moved me to my very core. I wept over this book because of its ability to encapsulate the transition from girlhood to teenagehood to young adulthood, and then even into motherhood, even into parts of my life that I haven't seen yet. It absolutely connected with me on a very deep level. A, because of the way that Madeline Miller wrote it, but also because of the story of Circe and our ability to take these characters and turn them into so much more. To have a redemption of Medusa, who absolutely was a woman who was taken advantage of and turned into a monster by all those around her. A modern woman can very much relate to this ancient Greek story. And then just, being a badass. We love being badasses. We love Atalanta. So, there are tons and tons of examples of Renaissance stories, or stories discovered in the Renaissance, in the reclaiming of antiquity, and then those stories, learning from those stories, authors learning from those stories, and turning them into brand new classics. And then those classics being brought again into the modern world. I absolutely adore these retellings, like this one, which is Romeo and Juliet, my favorite Shakespeare play. I know I am a hopeless romantic at heart, I cannot help it. And it was brought into 1920s Shanghai with two gangs. So, again, we have the Italian Renaissance and their blood feuds creeping their way into modern retellings of these stories, and I absolutely adore it to no end. Another large part of the preservation of antiquity, and where we get a lot of these myths, is from the plays that were written during Greek and Roman antiquity, and even further and beyond. And my absolute favorite, if you couldn't guess by the fact that my favorite Shakespearean play is Romeo and Juliet, if you had to use that information to guess what my favorite story from Greek mythology would be, you would be correct in guessing Orpheus and Eurydice, because star-crossed lovers are just the best. Again, the cyclical nature of storytelling. We have been telling the same kinds of stories forever. I don't know what it is about these star-crossed lovers that we latch onto in our hearts. It's absolutely breathtaking. And our modern equivalent to this is my favorite musical, probably of all time, and that is Hadestown. It is a beautiful rendition and retelling of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, involving some of our favorite characters. Over here we have Eurydice, a poor and hungry young girl, and we have Orpheus, a poor and hungry poet who they fall in love despite themselves. I want to bring this up because I am a young 22-year-old woman living in the tumultuous year of 2024, and I connect so deeply to this musical and to this myth. And if it weren't for the ancient Greeks writing these stories, and then Petrarch and his fellow humanists digging these stories from their graves and bringing them back into the light, and inspiring musicians to write operas, who then immediately turned to ancient Greek stories because of humanism to take inspiration for their librettos. The very first opera written in 1607 by Monteverdi was Orfeo and Eurydice, because what better story for an opera showcasing magnificent human talent for singing than a story about a man whose voice is so beautiful that the hell itself wept for him and let him try again to take his lover back home, in which he ultimately fails, bringing back those ideas of Greek catharsis in tragedy. It's absolutely stunning, and if it weren't for those people, if it weren't for Petrarch and humanists bringing these stories back into light, we would not have pieces of art like this that are so deeply beautiful and moving. In researching the historical context for the Renaissance, as well as the humanistic elements for it, you cannot again ignore the Black Death. And not only did it inform a lot of history within the Renaissance, it very much informed a lot of the writing within the Renaissance. You can feel their confrontation with mortality, and to me it shows most of all in their preservation of ancient texts, in trying to attach themselves to these ancient narratives. Petrarch writing his letters to ancient figures, to Homer, to Cicero, to me was absolutely a way of inserting himself in this narrative and trying to attach himself to the legacy of these great figures in order for him to be remembered as well. They understood how easily life could be taken and how easily life could go from the way you knew it to something completely new. That's why I think, rebirth for this period of time, as much as it can be debated, I think is an extremely appropriate word for it, because as it is said in Hadestown, as the beautiful goddess Persephone sings, it's true, the earth must die, but then the earth comes back to life. And that is what I think happened. The Black Death was absolutely this death of an old way of life, and humanism and the Renaissance came out of the ashes, because they were confronted with death on such a large scale that they understood that in order to reach back, you had to go through text. You had to write things down. The literacy rates needed to be raised, because before you could pass on those messages, that wisdom that you had learned throughout your life, you were most likely going to die. So they understood the importance of writing everything down and going back through and preserving any piece of knowledge of humanity that they could possibly find and imbuing it with new life, breathing life back into it. I think when humanity is confronted by death on such a large scale, it is our instinct to turn to protect it, protect ourselves, to protect our legacy. That's kind of my defense of humanism, on why I think the preservation of humanity itself is so deeply important. And now, I know I made it a little bit personal, but there are some other just odds and ends and personal things that I want to talk about in defense of history and humanity. So let's do that. Something that hits really close to home, to me at least, about Renaissance Italy is the study of women. Feminism is, of course, a deeply personal issue to me, and I try every day to be a good feminist. Doesn't always work out, but we do the best that we can. But if we look at figures like Ippolita Sforza and Isabella d'Este in Renaissance Italy, these women were truly the masters of working within the confines that they were given, working with the tools that they were given. They knew exactly what kind of position they were in terms of completely being subject to the will of men, and they used that completely to their advantage. They were able to pull so many strings. They kind of became these puppet masters. And even when we think about, more everyday, less notable women who didn't have these huge titles attached to these really influential families, women really functioned as the masters of the home without the respect of the title. Men were still given the title of master. However, women were the ones who truly held that responsibility. They controlled what came in, what went out. They were pretty much constantly either pregnant or trying to be pregnant or giving birth. They were baby factories, almost to the point of like a Handmaid's Tale kind of dystopian level of like, oh my gosh, you had 19 children in 20 years and then died in childbirth kind of stuff. These are just such cunning and powerful women, even within the confines that they were given. And I think that speaks a lot to their intelligence. They knew, they were extremely cognizant of the positions that they were in. It was either get married and become this puppet master, or go to a convent and have many aspects of your life restricted. I mean, we heard in Boccaccio about certain nuns who kind of got the best of both worlds, but overall, no matter which avenue you chose as a woman, you were giving up a small part of yourself. You were either giving up these earthly pleasures, or you were giving up your ability to become educated in a certain way. Again, if you've ever felt alone in your struggle against the patriarchy, or in your half manic breakdowns of, oh my god, being a woman sometimes is almost insufferable. Some days you don't know if you have the strength to be a woman. Read stories about the women in the Renaissance, because they were champions of their time. And I think we can learn so much from them. And even if you don't take any of their advice, find strength with them, find comfort with them. That and sometimes it is so extremely frustrating to reach back through history and at every single point see that women have been shoved inside and shoved to the sidelines. And we have things like male flight, of when women finally fight hard enough to get into certain spheres, men leave it and then deem it unworthy. In terms of just practical uses for the study of history, and why you should do it, and what practical tools it can equip you with, we are in a kind of new renaissance of technology and information, and just having it shoved down, having so much information shoved down your throat so constantly. Things like media literacy are so deeply important for the next generations, for our mental health, for learning to cope with growing up. Maybe you're an older person who grew up before the concept of the internet even existed, and now you're in this extremely technological age where it is just being shoved down your throat. You don't have the tools to process all of that information all at once. We were not meant for stuff like this. We are suffering at the hands of our own creation. So having that kind of media literacy, being able to better sniff out misinformation, being able to understand what it's like to read primary and secondary sources and do the research on the person writing those things so you understand what kind of perspectives are being shared with you. If you're looking for any kind of example on why researching the authors of your sources is so important, take Sunato's praise of the city of Venice that we read, for example. I read that document before actually reading our little blurb on the author himself, and I thought that he was a tourist going to the city of Venice and having the time of his life and writing down any piece of information he could possibly get. He wanted to share everything he knew about the city of Venice because we'd seen that before in humanist writers, this kind of need to and this want to share every piece of information that they knew. And then, after concluding that document, I went and I actually read the description of the author, and it turns out he was a politician in the city of Venice, and he was writing this paper to make the city of Venice look really, really good, similar to how Leonardo Bruni wrote the praise of Florence to make Florence sound like Disney World. So it's important to know who is writing these sources. It's important to know which news networks you're getting your news from. What kind of political sphere are you getting your information from? How could the background of this author potentially influence their writings? These are all really important things because misinformation doesn't always mean that they're lying. Sometimes they're telling the truth, but through an extremely obscured political lens. And the research of history can absolutely give you the tools that you need in order to be able to sniff that out and understand where your information is coming from. So I really hope I've been able to justify why these things need to stay in our education system, why these things need to be brought to light and are just as important as STEM subjects. I think we absolutely need to keep the study of history and humanity alive in our education so that we do not lose the passion for ourselves. We need people who care about people, and we need that to stay alive. And I hope that in me becoming a teacher, I am able to inspire at least a small, tiny little portion of our next generation to continue caring about us. Bye.
I'm the tech boy. I'm the one who texts. I'm just making sure the camera angle looks good. Anyway. Num 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 num.